Hello, thank you for watching the presentation of our paper, The Adaptive Architectural Layout, How the Control of a Semi-Autonomous Mobile Robotic Partition was shared to mediate the environmental demands and resources of an open-plan office. It is known that open-plan office layout cannot effectively support the needs of collocated workers. This is firstly because of a lack of control on environmental conditions. Imagine you are trying to focus on writing a paper, and the automatic sunshade opens, creating glare on your laptop. Then your colleagues start having a discussion, distracting you from your focus. Now your supervisor suddenly wants to have a video conference, making you become the disturbance for everyone in the office. All of these stress occurs because of a lack of divisions between co-located needs and activities, resulting in a demand from the environment for workers to exert additional physical and psychological efforts just to complete their tasks. Exposure to these demands in the long term can cause not only burnout, but also health deficits. It is therefore urgent for the office layout to enhance its environmental resources, which workers can employ to achieve their needs. Some office layout concepts have attempted to tackle this challenge. The flexible office allows workers to move the furniture and reconfigure its layouts. However, it is still manually taxing, socially awkward, and requires careful planning in advance. The activity-based office layout offers separate spaces that are optimized for specific work tasks. However, it comes with additional stress of booking a suitable space on time, or a feeling of detachment due to the absence of a personalized work desk. In this research, we propose the concept of adaptive office layout, which is based on the premise that workers should not have to adapt to the office environment. Instead, the office layout should be able to adapt to their changing and diverse needs. This concept is built upon the technological advancement of robotic furniture, which is now not only able to move life-sized architectural elements, but also autonomously interact with people and even nudge their behaviors through carefully designed motion. Recent research of robotic partitions, including our own, show that we can now adapt the layout dramatically through robotic means. Yet despite these advancements, it is still fully unknown how robotic furniture can actually mediate the needs of multiple co-located occupants, who can have different personal sensitivities, conflicting activities, and diverse social relationships with each other, all while mitigating the environmental demands in their workspace. Our research question is therefore, how can the control of a semi-autonomous mobile robotic partition be shared by multiple workers to mediate the environmental demands and resources of an open-plan office layout? Because of the innovative nature of the research question, we employ the exploratory research through design approach. The robotic furniture in our study is a semi-autonomous robotic partition, which can autonomously localize and navigate between given locations in a known environment. The robotic partition is built on top of an ultra-silent and robust industrial robot configuration with 2 LiDAR sensors. It also includes 2 acoustic panels, handles, emergency buttons, and 2 small displays that communicate its status via text and colors. We deployed this robotic partition in a real-world office with 13 workers, in which 12 are female, during a 5-week period. The deployment starts with a co-design session with the workers to collect possible locations of the robotic partition, which we called adaptations, and the environmental demands in the office that it could remedy for them. It was then followed with an in-the-wild study, in which the workers could control the robotic partition via an online interface. The data that we collected includes the digital log of the partition and the control interface, observations, questionnaire results, and interview transcripts. Specifically, the co-design session resulted in 34 different adaptations aiming to remedy 5 different environmental demands. We observed a difference in demands between 4 work islands that the workers were located at, which we numbered from 1 to 4 starting from the entrance of the office, which was mostly because of the space that each work island is adjacent with. For example, participants in Work Island 1 mostly focused on acoustic demands from the reception. Participants in Work Island 2 aimed to remedy visual demands from the meeting rooms. Participants in Work Island 3 focused on the glare from the window, while participants in Work Island 4 were mostly affected by acoustic demands from the cafeteria. From these 34 co-designed adaptations, we generalized into 43 locations of the partition, from which the participants could choose from during the in-the-wild study. To facilitate transparency and encourage negotiations between the participants, we designed an online control interface for the robotic partition. The interface firstly includes the status of the partition, who is using it, from when, and their reasonings. It then queries the participant to either input their name or choose to act anonymously. A map of the office shows the current location of the partition and other locations that the participant could choose from. It then asks them to choose a priority level for their adaptation and give a reasoning visible to their colleagues. A higher priority level allows participant to overrule an active adaptation with lower priority. The interface also includes a feedback box, which we encourage the participants to give us as much feedback as they could. After 5 weeks of deployment, we vectored 96 adaptations aiming to remedy 4 main environmental demands. The number of adaptations were highest during week 2, when participants were sufficiently familiar with the partitions, and started reducing from week 3, when less participants were coming to the office. In a day, the number of adaptations were highest during the busiest work hours, from 11 to 16 except for the lunchtime at 12. Between the work islands, participants at Island 1 consistently focused on acoustic demands. Participants at Island 2 focused on glare, while participants at Island 4 aimed to remedy both acoustic and visual demands. We also observed that while participants at Work Island 1 and 3 mostly initiated adaptations close to their area, participants at Work Island 2 and 4 initiated some adaptations that were far away from their work island. Among the adaptations, 77% were deemed successful, while 26% created unintended demands on the participants. For example, adaptations aimed to reduce acoustic demands were successful for some participants, but not for others, because a single partition could not create an enclosed space. It also affected natural lighting in some cases. Adaptations aimed at visual demands helped shield participants from a distracting meeting room, but negatively affected those inside the meeting room itself. Adaptations covering glare yet also reduced the seating area of some participants, and adaptations stopping the entrance of unwanted visitors were perceived as sending a wrong message to them. Through a thematic analysis of the interview data, we revealed 6 regulating factors that the participants assessed to initiate adaptations. These factors are categorized between the characteristics of the environmental demands and the perception of the initiators on their prospective adaptations. They include the demand severity, reflecting how far it negatively impacted the initiator. This severity is coupled with the adaptation potential, describing how far the initiator expected the adaptation to remedy the environmental demand. On the other hand, the demand provenance defines its origin, whether from external factors or from other co-located workers. This provenance is coupled with adaptation shareability, representing in how far its effectiveness could be shared with other colleagues. The predictability of a demand, meanwhile, reflects the likelihood of its occurrence, whereas the intentionality of an adaptation describes how readily other people can interpret its purpose. The participants employed these 6 regulating factors to decide whether to initiate an adaptation among 2 axes. The first axis is location, describing whether the adaptation should take place around the initiator or around the demand. The second axis is timing, describing whether the adaptation should be proactive, taking place before the demand occurs, or reactive, taking place during its occurrence. Based on these 2 axes, we defined 4 distinct spatiotemporal adaptation strategies. The first strategy is prevention, which involves initiating an adaptation proactively at the location of the environmental demand to reduce its likelihood of occurrence. The second strategy is anticipation, which involves initiating an adaptation proactively around the location of the initiator, so that its environmental resource is sufficiently improved to cope with a future demand. The intervention strategy involves initiating an adaptation reactively around the location of an ongoing demand, so to reduce its severity or even disrupt its occurrence. The last strategy of mitigation involves initiating an adaptation around the initiator to improve its environmental resources in response to an ongoing demand. We thus propose that these adaptation strategies can be used as a spatiotemporal model to distinguish among distinctive typologies of robotic manifestations in how occupants perceive them. Evidently, our qualitative insights revealed the causal relationships between the 6 regulating factors with these 4 adaptation strategies. For example, when the demand severity was expected to be unbearable, participants opted for proactive adaptations to best prepare for it. When the adaptation potential was perceived to be ineffective, participants chose to adapt around the demand itself to disrupt its occurrence. If the demand provenance was their colleagues, participants would adapt around themselves to not disturb others. However, they felt empowered to do otherwise if the adaptation benefits can be shared. When the demand was predictable, participants opted for proactive adaptations. To avoid misunderstanding of their intentions, participants directly adapt around the environmental demands at hand. Consequently, both the act of initiating and experiencing an adaptation were perceived as a form of social interaction. This was because participants who played as the initiator or the environmental demand both have a personal proxemic zone around themselves, which is inherently sensitive to any external intervention. An adaptation, therefore, can be seen as if an initiator extending their influence beyond their personal proxemic zone to impact others. This can cause social tension for both the initiator and the demand originator. Therefore, the participants only initiated these adaptations when they were sufficiently empowered, such as when the demand severity was unbearable, or when the adaptation potential could be shared. To this end, we thus propose that the relationship between the 4 adaptation strategies and the 6 regulating factors can serve as a general guideline that informs how future autonomous adaptation systems could select the most appropriate adaptation strategy in a given situation for co-located occupants. On the other hand, our findings emphasize that participants primarily interpreted the intentions behind an adaptation based on its spatiotemporal context, rather than the more explicit communication methods like the control interface or conversations. For example, they observe external factors like the weather, the occurring activities in the office, the location of the partition, and who it would benefit the most, as well as the co-located occupants with their own sensitivities, to determine the possible environmental demand and the initiator of a specific adaptation. Notably, this interpretability was only possible because of their familiarity of the office place, including the spatial qualities of its architecture, the situational qualities of predictable events, and the subjective qualities of their close-knit colleagues. While it is known that these 3 qualities together contribute to a holistic sense of place, which determines the architectural experience of occupants, we propose that this architectural design knowledge can also facilitate more appropriate behavior of robotically actuated spatial adaptation, as well as any human-robot interaction within the built environment, to enhance the satisfaction and even the health and well-being of occupants. Thank you again for watching our presentation. Please also check out our paper for further insights.